city is called Nuremberg, so N-U-R-N with the umlauts over the U, and then B-E-R-G, so Nuremberg. So it's on the wee sign that we've got here ahead of us. So when we arrive, we're going to get off the coach. We'll be very close to the main market square, and I would like to do a small orientation with you there just to point out some of the major sites. We'll need to use the Vox box for that because obviously I cannot shout, so if you need to dig those out, you've got a little bit of a stretch to do that. And you're going to be outside for about 2 hours. There are many cafes and restaurants that you could go into, of course, but some of the stuff worth looking at is outdoors, and often on a Friday they have a big market thing in the square as well. It's a good opportunity for you to try a very typical Nuremberg snack. Even if the market square is not in operation, there is another place where you can get this snack. It's to do with sausages. So in Nuremberg, the sausages that they're famous for are the very small ones. You might have seen them even at breakfast. They're kind of the length of a finger, basically. So what you would have as a very typical snack in Nuremberg would be something called drei im Weckler. The drei means number 3, and that's 3 sausages in the bread roll, which is the Weckler. So it would typically be served with mustard and maybe sauerkraut if you're feeling very adventurous. So it's a nice quick wee snack. But if you go into a sausage restaurant, you can sit down and you have like a plate of sausages, usually 6 or even 9 or 12 sausages, and it would be served with things like potato salad and horseradish. It's a very typical Nuremberg lunch, for example, so you might want to think about those. The other sort of thing to try food-wise in Nuremberg is definitely the gingerbread, but it's a little bit different to what you would probably know as gingerbread. In German it's called Lebkuchen, and it's actually more in the German style. It's a honey-sweetened dough. Bakers noticed that if it was sweetened with honey, it would tend to ferment, and then it improved the quality of the bread, basically. So they started doing this. They started making it in November, and by December it would be in wonderful condition after undergoing the fermentation period. So it's monks who are credited with starting to make it in Nuremberg. As early as 1395 it is recorded as being made here. There is another city called Ulm who claims that they made it earlier, but the Nuremberg version is definitely the most famous. So there was an event where one of the Holy Roman Emperors was in Nuremberg, and he invited all the children of the city to a special event and presented them all with this Lebkuchen. The kids all loved it, and that really increased the prominence of this particular product. There are also a few variations. One is known as Pfefferkuchen, so-called pepper cake. I wouldn't necessarily say it's spicy, but it's got a little bit of a different flavour. So Nuremberg was a little bit unique. Eventually, only bakers were allowed to make this particular gingerbread, whereas in other towns, anyone would have been allowed to make it. But here it had to be a baker if it wanted to use that particular name. There is also another version that they have here called Elisenlebkuchen, which is made without flour. So that's also a very popular variant here. One of the things that set the Lebkuchen here apart from its other variations, Nuremberg was on a very busy trading route. Both east-west and north-south trading routes passed through here. So they had access to all sorts of exotic spices. They might not sound so exotic today, but back in those days, to be able to add things such as aniseed, cardamom, cloves, ginger, allspice, and even things like almonds and walnuts to your recipes made the Lebkuchen here rather unique. So it is a very, very popular product from here, and there are 2 nice shops selling it on the market square. If the market is on, there'll be lots of stalls that are selling Lebkuchen as well. So plenty of opportunities if you would like to take that as a souvenir. So Nuremberg is a very important city actually in German history. It doesn't really get mentioned probably as a town until about the 11th century. There were certainly settlements here before that, but it's at that point that it started to rise to prominence on these trading routes. So from Italy to the north of Europe they would pass through here, and also if they were going from the east over towards the western parts of Europe, this was one of the very typical routes that they would pass along. So gradually some titles were bestowed on the town. The rulers of the town became sort of members of the nobility. But it's the year 1356 that was a big one for Nuremberg. The Holy Roman Emperor at that time, Charles IV, named Nuremberg as the city where the so-called imperial diet must be held. So that was the imperial parliament. So every time they would have to have this parliament held here, all the dignitaries of the Holy Roman Empire would come to Nuremberg. The crown jewels of the empire would come here as well, so they had to build a castle to house the precious crown jewels whilst the parliament was in session. So now there's a very, very big castle up on the hill overlooking the city of Nuremberg. It also was bestowed all sorts of rights about imperial immediacy, meaning they only had to answer to the Holy Roman Empire, the emperor himself, and lots of concessions for trade and certain trade fairs and so on were given. So that brought a lot of extra wealth into the city of Nuremberg. So it became an extremely prosperous city and much frequented by all the important people of the Holy Roman Empire. But things changed in 1547, trading routes were changing, and the importance of Nuremberg started to decline. And so the city did actually enter into a sort of gradual downward spiral over the following 2 centuries or so. By the time we got into the early 1800s, the city was in quite a bit of debt. This is when Napoleon was there redrawing the maps of Europe and suggested that Nuremberg should become part of the Kingdom of Bavaria. There are a lot of people here who actually might rather have been aligned with Thuringia to the north. Maybe culturally they felt they were a little more in line with them. But the decision was made, they went to become part of Bavaria, so Bavaria absorbed their debt, which was quite important. But it also meant that the city, which had very much embraced the Protestant Reformation, had to stop persecuting its Catholic population. So they had to start living side by side happily, because the Kingdom of Bavaria was very definitely Catholic. So in the 1800s, industrialization arrived here in Nuremberg and brought renewed prosperity to the city. So a lot of machinery factories started to be springing up around here, and it meant that by the time we rolled into the 20th century, the factories here were producing things that were important for the Nazi war effort, but the Nazis had already earmarked this city as being their spiritual home as well. Hitler, as we've heard before, was intrigued by the idea of his Third Reich, following on from the First and the Second Reich. The first was the Holy Roman Empire, and this was a hugely important city in the Holy Roman Empire, so it made sense to Hitler that this should become the place where they would have, for example, their Nazi Party rallies, first in 1927, then in 1929, and then in the years 1933 to 38. Massive productions, huge propaganda spectacles, and Hitler also invited his famous filmmaker, a woman called Leni Riefenstahl, to come and film the proceedings as well. So the most famous film that she produced for the rallies was something called The Triumph of the Will. She employed extraordinarily innovative camera techniques. Had she had a different subject matter, her legacy might be more favourably looked upon. But she was very definitely a favourite of the Nazis, and she made no real apologies for it in later years either, so that spoiled her legacy a little bit, but really the techniques she used were quite extraordinary at the time, hadn't been seen before. So it meant that we had very good pictures of what Nuremberg looked like before the war arrived here, which is just as well because this city was about 90% destroyed in the war, especially the Old Town area. As one of the strongholds of the Nazi Party, they were one of the last holdouts against the Allies as well. So when the Allies arrived, it was a very slow process to liberate the city. It was street-to-street fighting, almost hand-to-hand, which meant that the bombing raids that had occurred, particularly the one in January of 1945, they had done enough damage, but then this sort of street-by-street fighting was the last straw, so the damage was just so destructive and quite extraordinary. But they did set about rebuilding in the post-World War II era. Nuremberg, as part of Bavaria, was in the western part of Germany, so it benefited from an influx of funds from things like the Marshall Plan, and it was able to rebuild its industry, so it has become actually a very strong industrial centre. Big German companies like Siemens and MAN have big industrial bases around here, so machinery, motor vehicles, big trucks and so on get produced around here, but also some more high-tech machinery, and then things like stationery. So it's quite a varied sort of industrial base around here. The city is also culturally quite important. It is the capital of the region of Franconia. So Franconia is a region within Bavaria, and it has quite a distinct cultural identity. One of the things that sets it apart from the southern part of Bavaria is that although they definitely drink beer here, of course they drink beer, they are Germans after all, but here wine is important as well. And it's important to note that many people from here would probably consider themselves Franconian first, then Bavarian, then German. So it's quite a distinct cultural identity. So a little bit